Welcome to Bad Weapon Academy, where we take a look at the worst weapons TF2 has to offer, and I show you how to best utilize them. Jungle Inferno definitely had some interesting balance choices. On the whole, I think a lot of them were pretty good. The reserve shooter nerf was a long time coming, the pocket pistol got a much needed touch-up, and the rescue ranger required metal to repair buildings finally. However, there were also some questionable changes. I'm as glad as any other sniper to not have to deal with the old danger shield ever again, but the fact that it's now a massive middle finger to a class who should normally have a substantial advantage in short range and a reasonable counterplay at long range shouldn't be justified by the existence of one or two weapons. And while the nerf on the Sandman was well deserved, it didn't justify making it completely worthless. But there was one nerf in particular that not only was completely undeserved, but also made the weapon in question worthless. And that's today's topic, the Eviction Notice. This was a weapon that was never complained about, never banned, no one really cared about it before. It was used for silly Jojo meme loadouts where you ran around punching people with speedy but ineffective attacks. But to coincide with the nerf given to the GRU, Valve decided to completely neuter this thing for no good reason. How dirty did they do these brass knuckles? Well, let's find out. Upon hitting an enemy, which you can do with a 40% faster attack speed than the stock fists, you'll gain a speed boost, which will bring you to around the same speed as a babyface's blaster scout with no boost. Unless you have a conch boost or a whip soldier with the GRU, this is probably the fastest you'll be able to go as a heavy. However, this does come with the drawback of having one of the most punishing damage penalties in the game, a 60% reduction in damage dealt. This changes your fist from something that, while useless, can still do respectable damage, into a worse stock bat for the scout. While active, the Eviction Notice will also give the heavy a 15% boost in his speed, putting him somewhere between a soldier and demo in terms of speed without the buff on hit. This is half the boost given to you by the GRU, so already it's not seeming all that worth it for simply getting around the map. But this used to be fine. Back in the day, the Eviction Notice would only give you a damage vulnerability while the weapon was active, making it perfectly reasonable to use in rollouts to get a small speed boost without having to worry about getting marked for death like you would be with the GRU. Now though, things are a lot different. Holding the Eviction Notice out will drain your maximum health pool by 5 health per second, and much like the GRU, there's a small toll to pay each time you bring it out on top of that. You lose 20 health each time you pull out the Eviction Notice, meaning you can't swap too quickly or else you'll end up losing all of your health. This is the nail in this weapon's coffin. For something that gives you such a minimal boost in speed, this is far too punishing. Both demos and soldiers have a means to get around their slow movement speed with blast jumping, but all the Eviction Notice does is bring the heavy on par with those classes' base walking speed. The GRU meanwhile bring you up to the base walking speed of the engineer, sniper, and pyro, and that's much more reasonable for getting around the map. For this video, I'm pretty much only going to be comparing the Eviction Notice to the GRU in terms of its movement mechanics, because it's very clear with this balance change that they were trying to make it into a sort of GRU light. So let me tell you why they failed in every single way. So the GRU is primarily useful for 3 things: rolling out to the front lines, retreating from dangerous situations quickly, and sometimes closing the gap on enemies. But this one is less common and generally applicable to simply reaching the front lines, but we'll examine it regardless. Let's discuss rolling out first. The GRU brings you to about 100% movement speed rounded up, while the Eviction Notice brings you to about 88% movement speed. That may not seem like a big difference just looking at the percentage, but keep in mind that percentage-wise, that's not too far off from the difference between a normal pyro and one with the power jack. So, if you have the option between using something that will get you to the front lines much faster than your other option, both for the same cost, why would you not use the faster option? Well, you may be thinking that the Eviction Notice's slower health drain will mean that you get to the front lines healthier. That's certainly an idea, but you also need to consider the health regen. Oh sure, the Eviction Notice drains your health slower than the GRU, but it also regenerates it slower. Same as the drain rate, 5 health per second. Meaning, because you're spending longer on your rollouts to get to the same place, you're still draining a lot of health. Here's an example I've set up on one of the game's longer rollouts to the front lines on one of its most popular maps. Badwater Spawn to the 3rd point. With the Eviction Notice, I can make it to the front lines in 22 seconds with 170 health. And with the GRU, I make the same trip in 19 seconds with 100 health. This seems pretty clear cut. The difference in time was fairly negligible, and I made it with 70 more health than the GRU. But then you factor in the regen time. The GRU's 10 health regen a second means you can get from the minimum 100 health back up to 300 in just 20 seconds. But the eviction notice will take 40 seconds to do the same. Meaning if we take the 130 health we're missing and divide it by 5, we end up spending 26 seconds regenerating health. 6 full seconds more than the GRU takes from the bare minimum. And if we count that alongside the 3 seconds we wasted rolling out with a slower option, the choice couldn't be more clear. The GRU crushes it. You would think that long rollouts are where the eviction notice would shine compared to the GRU, but no, they only serve to make it look even worse. In an attempt to save time getting to the front lines, you end up wasting it waiting for your health pool to go back up. Now you might be thinking to use the Delocus bar in order to offset how much health you'll need to regenerate by the time you reach the front lines. And if that's what you're using either of these weapons for, then the chocolate bar is definitely a great choice, but primarily after you've made it to your destination, not beforehand. See, if you're missing base health from the GRU or eviction notice, then eat a chocolate bar, your base health recovers substantially faster. You can easily reach your max health pool with the extra 50 health the chocolate gives you in a matter of seconds, even if you ate it at 100 health. So naturally, this just makes the whole situation even worse for the eviction notice, because now you can get to the front lines faster and healthier if you just eat the world's healthiest chocolate bar. This strategy has great implications for the effectiveness of both the chocolate and the GRU, but it doesn't do nearly as much for the eviction notice. So long rollouts are out of the question, but short bursts of speed aren't much better for the eviction notice, and there's something the GRU specializes in, especially in rough situations where you need to get out fast or take immediate evasive actions against something like a sniper. What's nice about the GRU is that in situations where you're brought down to low health, the downside is effectively meaningless, giving you free mobility for you to use at your discretion so you can live to fight another day. And the sheer hops you can get from it are pretty insane, allowing you to juke out enemies and get to safety if you're good enough. With the eviction notice, that's not really in your control to the same degree, and the only time it will be is if you manage to land a punch, but we'll talk about that more in a bit. When you need to close a small gap, such as getting behind cover quickly or crossing a sight line, and the difference between getting to your destination or not is the difference between life and death, why wouldn't you throw all your chips in and get as much speed as possible? It's better to die an unavoidable death when you gave it everything you could, as opposed to actively taking a half measure and dying as a result of that instead. Now, closing the distance on enemies is where things get more interesting. For the GRU, they're actually fairly good at this, and thanks to Jungle Inferno removing the damage penalty, they're a decent choice if you want to engage in melee combat as heavy in short bursts, or in situations where you're caught off guard by an unexpected enemy coming around a corner, especially on servers with random crits enabled. These situations aren't super useful or frequent, but when they do happen, it's something that the GRU is at least competent in. At the very least, it can be an excellent surprise tactic, since not many people will be expecting a heavy to get right up in their face so quickly, and be able to keep up with most backpedaling classes. Not to mention, even if you still wish to engage with your minigun, using the GRU to close the gap on an enemy that would otherwise be just out of range can often prove to be worthwhile, even at the expense of your health. With the eviction notice, it's both worse and better for actively engaging enemies. Now obviously there's two major factors working against the eviction notice here compared to the GRU: less speed and pitiful damage. It's going to be a lot harder to catch up to enemies unless they happen to be just as slow as you, and even if you do, actually engaging these enemies with your melee is going to be a fool's errand, or at least engaging them with just your melee. This is where we get into the best strategy I've found for the eviction notice, and it's all based around one stat: the speed boost on hit. If you play heavy with a shotgun, then using the eviction notice on a slower or unaware enemy will help you keep up the pace with them and get in their face to do maximum meat shot damage while also increasing your own evasion. It's a strategy that works perfectly with fat scouting, since you're already on the move a lot more frequently than your average heavy, and you're a lot more flank oriented, giving you the opportunity to run in, get a quick hit, and start dancing around the enemies as you become much more evasive and aggressive than they could have expected. You can pair it with any shotgun, Even the panic attack, which normally suffers on heavy due to increased bullet spread and heavy slow movement speed. It'll pack much more of a punch since you can now get into enemies' faces with relative ease, and the family business is perfect for more extended fights where you might need to swap between it and the eviction notice to keep the speed boost going on multiple enemies. Now, it's worth comparing this to the more conventional and traditional Fat Scout melee of choice, the KGB. They definitely have a significant advantage in terms of the power they give to your shots thanks to the crit on kill buff, but how often you can get a melee kill with the KGB is very dependent on several factors outside of your control. Getting a single hit with the eviction notice by comparison is much easier. It only requires that you tap the enemy once and focus entirely on your shotgun, unless you want to chain punches together to keep the streak going for as long as possible, which you may need to do in larger fights as the speed boost only lasts you 3 seconds, but it still feels like a decently long time. On the subject of chaining punches together, you could also use this boosted speed to continue punching the enemy, but this isn't really advisable, except on targets you know for sure you can kill quickly. The damage penalty is just that bad. You may as well be hitting them with a wet paper towel. It suffers from the equalizer problem of having your random melee crits do shit for damage. Even worse than the equalizers at only 78 damage, which is even worse than a mini crit for your stock melee, but without the benefit of potentially scaling up to be able to one-shot a heavy. It just sucks for actual combat. Any kill you get will probably be on accident, or only in the rare case where you run into another heavy with whom you share the same type of stand. As a positive, it can also be extremely useful for escaping, as long as you manage to get a hit on an enemy. If you're in a situation you know you can't win, you can manage to get out of hairy situations even faster than the GRU will allow you to, but obviously with a higher degree of risk since you need to engage the enemy to begin with. But if they're not aware of you, then you can easily be out of their sight before they even realize what's happened, and you can use your shotgun to lay down suppressive fire as you escape. This is definitely more applicable to flank-oriented Fat Scouts, but it can still be useful in certain niche situations, like punching a nearby spy to get to a health pack or spawn more quickly. In general, the more enemies there are around you, the better of an idea it is to use your speed to escape instead of continue the fight. You can even use a speed boost to close in on targets with your minigun, just like you can with the GRU, while having the advantage of keeping the minigun out for the entire speed boost duration. Though it should be mentioned that the speed boost really isn't useful at all if your plan is to immediately rev up, since you spend nearly a third of your speed up time revving up in the first place. What makes the speed boost so appealing is that anything the GRU can do, the speed boost can give you while you're holding another weapon that isn't draining your health or restricting you to melee range. On the subject of the health drain though, it's one of the biggest problems with this strategy and ends up massively kneecapping it. Because you lose 20 health every time you pull out the eviction notice, every punch you take comes with a cost, and if you don't hit your mark, you've wasted time and health for nothing. It's something you'll need to be very sure about before you engage in a fight. Otherwise, instead of having a speed advantage, you'll have a health disadvantage. And don't forget to watch out for your nearby teammates so that they don't eat your melee hits and ruin everything. The other big problem is that, even though getting a single hit on an enemy isn't usually too difficult, it can be impossible if the enemy is aware of you. You don't have the raw speed of the GRU to catch up to most backpedaling enemies, and the ones you can catch up to will easily shred you at close range. It's best used reactively instead of proactively. You can definitely try to set up an ambush on someone, but you'll need to be fast and precise with your weapon switching, since holding out the eviction notice for too long will just cripple you before the fight even starts. Is this the most effective way to play heavy? Dear God, no. The fact that you're basing this entire playstyle off of Fat Scout should tell you that much. Is this even the most effective way to play Fat Scout? I wouldn't say so either. It can definitely be fun when it works out, but going for that punch can often land you into more trouble than it's worth. But is this the most effective way to use the eviction notice? As far as I'm concerned, yes. In any other situation besides those 3 short seconds after you punch someone, it is nothing but a worse, less efficient GRU, and you're better off using just about any other heavy melee, warrior spirit included. So, how do we fix these pathetic brass knuckles? Well, for starters, get rid of the health drain. It's a completely unnecessary addition. Replace it with a damage vulnerability like it used to have. That's what we did on the rebalance server. We even bumped up the base damage a little bit so it can be used with the buffalo stake more effectively. and gave it a faster deploy speed so you can whip it out fast to secure a quick hit, and make the shotgun strategy that much more effective. I'd say this still isn't the best heavy melee option, but it's far more palatable for people who may not want to mess with their health and still want to go fast. And that's it. That's all you have to do to make the Eviction Notice usable again. Is it still a bit of a GRU light? Yes, but it takes away the more polarizing elements of the GRU in exchange for less overall speed, except in specific situations. And I think that's perfectly fine. If the Buffalo Steak banning 6's community never had a problem with any iteration of the Eviction Notice, then I fail to see why this version would be considered too strong. That just about wraps things up. I'd say the Eviction Notice is Heavy's worst weapon overall, and I suppose it's kind of fitting that the first and last episodes of the series that talked about Heavy focused on new strategies revolving around use of the shotguns. It's nice to finally close the chapter on bad heavy weapons, but it doesn't get much easier from here. Until then though, go out there and evict the enemies from this mortal coil, and tell them Fish sent ya.